Hello, class. Welcome to this chapter 7 handout answer video. Hopefully you had a chance to look through it and try to work out these problems. We're going to go through, we're going to calculate some contribution margin percents, break even point. Maybe a break even point with multiple products and operating leverage. I did not put any margin of safety questions on here or any targeted income questions, but you can hopefully get those from the book. So let me share my screen and we will get going here. Draw. All right, so all these questions, this is all going to be the same company. Okay, it just asks us different things about the same company. So we have this head first company. We're going to sell bicycle helmets. We plan to sell 5,000 of them at $75 each, and it gives us our product costs broken down into direct materials, direct labor, variable factory overhead, total fixed factory overhead, and then we have some variable selling and some fixed selling and admin expenses. So first thing it wants us to do is calculate. That's weird. I don't like these lines here. So first thing I'm going to do is erase them. And let's just turn the draw off. Move it up here as far as we can. Now we'll turn it back on. All right. So first, number one, says calculate the variable cost per unit. Well, our direct materials are 30. That's a variable cost. Direct labor is 8. The variable overhead is 4. And our variable selling and admin is 3. We go through and add up all those different variable costs. They add up to $45 per unit. For number 2, calculate the total fixed cost. So we have 20,000 fixed overhead. We had fixed selling and admin of 29,500 for a total of 49,500 total. And finally, prepare a contribution margin income statement. And so for that, we start with our sales. Our sales amounted to $375. That was the 5,000 units times the $75 selling price. Okay, when we're making this, we subtract out first our variable cost. Our variable costs in this case were $225,000, which is the same over here, the 5,000 units multiplied by the $45 variable cost per unit that we calculated in number 1. That gets us our CM, our contribution margin of 150,000. From there, we subtract out our fixed costs, 49,500. To get us operating income of $100,500. And that was the answer that we were looking for there. Okay, so that's how you would do a contribution margin income statement. Remember, it's sales minus variable cost gets us our contribution margin, minus our fixed cost gets us to our operating income. Okay. Oh, I don't know what I did there. I'm just trying to get to the next question here. All right. All right, so here ahead, first company plans to sell 5,000 bicycle helmets at 75 each. This gives us the same thing. Unit variable cost is $45. Total fixed cost is 49,500 is what we just calculated. Calculate the number of break-even points in helmets. So remember, to find a unit break-even point, it equals fixed cost divided by our break-even point. Erase that. That is not right. It's not a break-even point. We're finding the break-even point. I'm gonna hit myself. Divided by our contribution margin per unit. our contribution margin per unit equals, I don't even want to put selling. Let me go ahead and erase that. Which is our price, contribution margin per unit. We're going to find by our price divided by variable cost per unit. So 75. Oh my goodness. I'm getting everything all screwed up. So just erase that. Contribution margin per unit. I don't know why I was starting to do it like a percent. Okay, slap my hand, contribution margin per percent. Price minus variable cost per unit. So equals 75 minus 5. My thing kind of went out on me a little bit. But there we get our contribution margin per unit to be $30 per unit. I made that a lot more difficult than I needed to be. But remember, contribution margin total is sales minus total variable cost. On the unit level, it's the selling price minus the variable cost per unit. Gets us 30. So then we can plug it in over here. Our fixed costs were 49,500 divided by 30 means our break even point here is 1,650, and it says do a statement to prove it. Well, if we took 1,650 multiplied by the $75 selling price, we would get sales of 123,750. Our variable cost would be the 1,650 times 45. So we would have total variable cost here of 74,250, making our contribution margin 49,500. And once you know it, we had 49,500 in fixed costs, making our operating income 0, which was the whole point of trying to figure out our break even number, is how much we would need to sell in order to break even. Just a little hint on these. If for some reason that number was 1,649.6, you would have to round it up to the next whole number. Okay, we cannot sell half of a product. So your break even point always has to be rounded up, even if it is a small decimal. All right, problem number 3 here. We still got the same company. Okay, now it wants to know what is the variable cost ratio and the contribution margin ratio. Variable cost percent. Ratio is just another way of saying percent. Okay, we find that by here, we're going to take variable cost per unit divided by price. Here, we're going to take contribution margin per unit divided by price. You can also do this on a total level by taking total variable cost divided by sales, or total contribution margin divided by sales. Then you get the same number. Well, here, our variable cost per unit was 45 divided by 75 equals 0.6, or 60%. Variable cost is 60%. Our contribution margin percent would be 30. The contribution margin per unit, remember, was our selling price 75 minus the variable cost per unit of 45 to get 30 divided by the 75 equals 0.4, or 40%. Part to remember here is these always equal 100% when added together, because remember our selling price is either covering the variable cost or it's getting added to our contribution margin. The third part here says, prepare an income statement based on the budgeted figures. In the column next to it, show percentages based on sales. Well, let's just look. We don't have to redo it. Let's go back to number 1 here, because we're working the same problem over and over again. I don't know why the variable cost was left out there. If we were to look here and we were to take the variable cost, the 225,000, and divide it by the 375,000, we would find 60% of our sales are there. If we took the 150 divided by the 375, we would find that 40% of our sales are in our contribution margin. Okay, so understanding this concept helps you do a lot of these calculations in your head without having to go through and make all these statements over and over again. Okay, and it just helps you sound more educated in the business world. All right, next. Suppose that now this company wants to start selling some motorcycle helmets also. Okay, we have the same kind of information for our bicycle helmets, selling price 75, variable cost per unit 45. Okay, but now we have a motorcycle helmet that we're going to sell for $220 with a variable cost of $140, and it gives us a new total fixed cost of $58,900. And then it says we expect to sell 5,000 bicycle helmets and 2,000 motorcycle helmets. So first thing we got to do is form a basket package, because I pulled it right out of the book, but basket by my terms. In my basket, if I'm going to expect to sell 5,000 bicycle helmets and 2,000 motorcycle helmets, I can cut that down to its simplest form here. And I can say, I cut out all the zeros and say, every time I sell 5 bike helmets, I'm going to sell 2 motorcycle helmets. So my basket is going to be 5 bike, 2 motor. Okay. When we form this package, it doesn't say on here, but our next step is to find the contribution margin of this package. Okay. So we're going to take how many we have in our basket, and we're going to multiply it by the contribution margin per unit for each one. Our bikes contribution margin per unit, the bicycle helmets, were $30. It was the 75 minus the 45. For the motorcycles, it's 80. Okay. The 220 selling price minus the 140 variable cost. Okay, that gets us our contribution margin per unit. When we multiply these out, that means the basket's going to have 150 here, 160 here. So if we sold a basket of products, we would have a contribution margin of $310. Break-even point of our basket then. Okay, we take our fixed cost and we're going to divide it by contribution margin per basket. So our fixed costs were, now it gives us to them at 58,900. We're going to divide that by this 310. That gives us 190 baskets. Okay, so then when we calculate how much we need to sell of each for our bicycles, if we sold 190 baskets and each basket had 5 bikes, we didn't need to multiply that out. So we would sell 950 bikes. For the motor, we had 190 baskets times 2 on each one, 380. And finally, it says check your answer by preparing a contribution margin income statement. We have done plenty of those, so I'm not going to go through and do another one for you, but you can go through. Just remember, you would have 2 sales columns. You'd have a bike sales, motorcycle sales. You have 2 variable costs. Okay, variable cost for the motorcycles, variable cost for the bicycle helmets. Get your contribution margin, subtract out your fixed cost, and you're going to find out that it is exactly 0 income. I have it done on my sheet here. I'm not going to write it out. I'm going to leave that for you to figure out once you know how to calculate this break-even point. And finally, the last thing here, calculate some operating leverage. Head First Company plans to sell 5,000 bicycle helmets at 75 each. Nothing has changed here. This goes back to our very original problem, okay? Operating income of 5,000 units sold is 100,500. Well, we can look at our very first question and we calculated that, right? Okay, we need to know now. Operating leverage equals contribution margin divided by operating income. Our total contribution margin. Well, we could go back and look at number 1 and do a statement. We could calculate it out. 5,000 bicycle helmets at 75 each. That was our sales. 5,000 times 45. That was our total variable cost. Subtract them and get our contribution margin. Or we can take our sales of 5,000 units. We can multiply that by 30. That is the contribution margin per unit. We find out that our contribution margin is $150,000. Scroll back to your very first question and look at it. You can see that it was what our contribution margin was then. Okay, so then to find our operating leverage, 150,000 divided by 100,500. Operating leverage comes out to 1.50 because it says here round all answers to the nearest tenth. Net operating leverage meaning that if we increased our sales by 10%, we are going to increase our operating income by 10% times 1.5 or 15%. Okay, it's not a very high operating leverage. They do not have a lot of leverage. So a change in sales is not going to have a great effect on their operating income. So there are all the problems for chapter 7. Hopefully working through some of these problems made some of these concepts make sense. It's really important to grasp this idea of contribution margin. Okay, be very helpful, especially moving forward into the short-term decision makings we are going to have next chapter. Okay, and I will talk to you all again then when we get on to chapter 8, those short-term operating income decisions. Take care.